World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars, began in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. His murder catapulted a war across Europe that lasted until 1918. During the conflict, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, the Central Powers, fought against Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Romania, Japan, and the United States, the Allied Powers. Thanks to new military technologies and the horrors of trench warfare, World War I saw unprecedented levels of carnage and destruction. By the time the war was over and the Allied powers claimed victory, more than 16 million soldiers and civilians were dead, forming the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was a punishment to Germany for escalating World War I. The treaty was signed by Germany and the Allied powers. The delegation comprised of George Clemenceau for France, Woodrow Wilson for the USA, David Lloyd George for Great Britain, Vittorio Orlando for Italy, and Hermann Müller, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, as well as the jurist Dr. Bell from Germany. It was signed in the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles, France, on June 28, 1918, but was not implemented until January 10, 1920. This treaty consisted of many punishments to Germany for escalating World War I. Although Germany didn't start the war, the reason Germany was blamed for starting World War I was because they didn't do much to stop it. In fact, many historians believe Germany actively encouraged the war, despite the systems of alliance in place that should have deterred the European powers from fighting. The Germans knew if Austria invaded Serbia, the Russians would intervene on Serbia's behalf. Then Germany would have to come to Austria's aid. Germany also really wanted a war with Russia to acquire new territory in the east, but couldn't justify it. Going back to its Austrian ally was more than enough, and Austria had a reason to go to war with Serbia. So Germany kept pushing its ally despite calls for peace from the rest of Europe. Some of the punishments to Germany for starting World War I was that Germany had to give back territory to Belgium, France, Poland, and Denmark. The treaty also made Germany's army reduce to 100,000 soldiers and abolish their air force. Germany could not draft men for the army, only let people volunteer. Germany was not allowed armored vehicles, submarines, or aircraft, and the Navy could only build 6 battleships. Germany also had to pay 132 billion gold marks, or about 269 billion US dollars today, for war damages. After the war, up to 3 million Germans had been killed. Germany had been forced to become a republic instead of a monarchy, and its citizens were humiliated by their nation's bitter loss. It ended up taking Germany 92 years to pay off their war debts. One of the other things Germany went through was hyperinflation, which is so bad that a piece of bread in Germany went from a couple cents to 200 million marks by 1923. This is because in 1922, Germany defaulted on its reparations payment as scheduled. The first reparations payment had taken all she could afford to pay. The French believed Germany could make the repayment, but were choosing not to. However, the German government argued they could not afford to pay. In response, France and Belgium sent troops into Germany's main industrial area, the Ruhr Valley. Their aim was to confiscate industrial goods as reparation payments, as they didn't believe Germany was unable to pay the second reparation. They occupied coal mines, railways, steelworks, and factories, all things that were important to Germany's economy. The German government ordered workers to follow a policy of passive resistance, meaning they were refusing to work or cooperate with the foreign troops, and in return, the government continued to pay their wages. The French responded to this by shooting those refusing to take orders. Other people were expelled from the Ruhr region altogether. Overall, 132 were killed, and approximately 150,000 were expelled from the area. The immediate consequences of the occupation were not good for the German government. They then decided to print more money to pay the workers in the region, contributing to more hyperinflation. A general strike then happened, and political instability was at stake, causing most citizens of Germany not able to afford food, as it was rare and expensive. And with no factories to make money, Germany was forced to suffer poverty. Germany was outraged. They lost 10% of their land, all its overseas colonies, 12.5% of its population, 16% of its coal, and 48% of its iron industry. There were also the humiliating terms, which made Germany accept blame for the war, limit their armed forces, and pay billions of dollars to the Allied powers. The Treaty of Versailles hit Germany with a heavy blow enough to cause resentment. However, it left Germany strong enough to seek revenge. This is why some people say the Treaty of Versailles helped cause World War II, as many believe it made the people of Germany want to seek revenge on the world. Some historians believe that the peacemakers did the best job they could, given the difficult circumstances they were in. Other historians believe the treaty was a disastrous half-measure. No one knew how to punish Germany fairly, since Germany had affected everyone in different ways. For example, in the USA, reactions to the treaty were generally negative. Many Americans felt that the treaty was unfair on Germany. More importantly, they felt that Britain and France were making themselves rich at Germany's expense, and that the USA should not be helping them to do this. This was not really the case, but many Americans believed it. While reactions in France were mixed, there were celebrations that the war was definitely over. People approved of the reparations that Germany had to pay. They also liked the fact that Germany's borders with France, the Rhineland, would be demilitarized. This meant Germany could not station any troops in this area. They appreciated that the coal mines of Saar would bring prosperity to France instead of Germany. They also believed that the League of Nations would be a powerful force for peace. It would protect France if Germany recovered and tried to act aggressively again. However, there was a strong sense that Germany still threatened France. Many French people looked at the terrible cost of the war and believed that France had suffered far more than Germany. And soon after the treaty, Clemenceau stood for election as president of France. He was outraged when other candidates stood against him. It was then that he realized how bitter many people were about the treaty. No one could come to an agreement on the level of punishment, and so they just let everyone punch Germany in the face and walk away, leaving Germany there, to sit there, waiting to come back. The treaty left such a drastic impact on Germany that its effects carried well into the future. Its economy and life was in shambles, and because of all this, all it took was a man to take advantage of all of that. Had the consequences be even slightly lesser, or even a little more fair, perhaps the people could not have been so easily fooled. Germany was looking for an escape, and through a man named Adolf Hitler, some found it. He used their misfortune from the treaty to gather Germany together and ended up starting a whole nother war. As it turns out, the Great War, the war to end all wars, wasn't the last. In conclusion, the Treaty of Versailles not only failed, but also was a major player in starting another war, which is the exact opposite of the treaty's entire purpose. They failed to realize what their actions could lead to in the future if they weren't careful. They won the war, yet they couldn't set their minds together on a definitive punishment. They ended up crippling Germany terribly, but didn't pay attention to what effect that could have on their spirit and beliefs. It caused one of the biggest cases of hyperinflation behind countries like Hungary, Yugoslavia, and Zimbabwe. I hope we can use this as an example to better ourselves in the future and learn from our mistakes.